Thank you for viewing this American Sewing Guild educational series on intersecting seams, also called crossed seams. Intersecting seams are seams which cross each other. All seam allowances should be finished before they are crossed or intersected. When seams intersect, they should meet exactly at the seam point and should not be off to one side or the other. Take time when intersecting seams to produce quality sewing. Create plain seams, meld the seams, and press open seam allowances. After pressing open, finish seam allowances with the preferred method for the fabric and the project. Refer to other videos in the library for types of seam finishes and their uses. For this video, the seam allowances will be left unfinished for a good view of the intersecting or cross seams. Place right sides together. This could be a side seam with a sleeve or any other combination of seams that needs to be sewn together. Check the pattern instructions. Most times, seams will be crossed in the manner shown where one will lay right on top of the other. On occasion, though, one seam may need to be offset for the design being sewn. Place a pin through the first seam and through to the other side. Be sure the pin slides through the center of each sewn seam line. Once the pin is through the center of each seam allowance, then bring the pin end from the back through to the front and secure in place. Now the next seam can be sewn. This will marry the two seams together. Place the cut edge along the throat plate edge, backstitch, and then sew to the intersected seams. Stop with the needle in the fabric just before reaching a pin. Continue sewing the seam after removing the pin. The seam has been sewn and the first seams are now intersected or crossed. Before continuing on, double check to make sure the seams absolutely meet. If they do not, take out some of the stitching in the seam and repeat the process. If the seam is accurate, then proceed by melding the stitching line and press open the seam. Be sure to use a seam roll or press stick if needed. Give a final press from the right side of the seam. To cross the seam which has been serged together, or an encased seam or a French seam, the seam allowances should be pressed in opposite directions if possible, so all the bulk of the seam allowances are not on the same side when crossed. To do this, prepare the seams. Align the seam lines with the seam allowances going in opposite directions. Place a pin through the intersecting seams as was done with the plain seams. Pin the seam allowances together. Always try and keep the entire pin within the seam allowance to be sewn. Sew the seam. Stop with the needle in the fabric before you get to the pin. Remove the pin and continue sewing the seam. Let's watch how to sew an intersecting seam. Prepare the seam. This one has been serged close, but it could also be an open seam. As you get to the intersection, check to be sure the seam allowances are not twisted underneath. Before getting to the seam allowances, stop with the needle in the fabric, sew to the pin, and then use your index finger to anchor the seam and then continue sewing the remainder of the seam. The seam has been sewn, and the previous seams intersect. Before continuing on, double check to be sure the seams absolutely meet. If they don't, take out some of the stitching and redo the seam to create a professionally sewn seam. Meld the seam to set the stitches, and press the seam allowances open. The seam has been sewn. The seam allowances intersect, and this seam allowance may now be finished. Thank you for viewing this American Sewing Guild video. If you have any questions, email ramona@asg.org. The American Sewing Guild is a national nonprofit organization dedicated to people who believe sewing is a rewarding and creative activity. If you enjoyed this video, join ASG to view our library of in-depth educational videos on various sewing topics. They are free to our members. Members also enjoy discounts from vendors who support our organization, along with many other benefits.